Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Rachel Endo, Dean of the School of Education here at UW Tacoma, and it's my great honor to welcome all of you to our inaugural Colloquium series on advancing dialogues, education, empowerment, and equity. I would like to start this very special event out with the School of Education's land acknowledgement, which we have posted on our website. And we here in the School of Education at UW Tacoma acknowledge that we learn, live, teach on or near the traditional ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people. The UW Tacoma campus is located on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Puyallup tribe of Indians. I know that we are all coming from different places, and so currently I also am on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Puyallup tribe of Indians. I live about a mile from campus, but I would like to invite everyone to take a brief moment to reflect about where you are currently situated. And as Dr. Robin Minthorn reminds us, to also reflect on the ways by which we all benefit from where we are situated on these traditional ancestral homelands. And for us to continue to advocate for our Indigenous neighbors and other communities who have historically been underrepresented and underserved in higher education. Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Amy Maharaj, and I just want to thank all of you for joining me today for our new series called Advancing Dialogues, Education, Empowerment, and Equity Colloquium series. So why this series? Myself, Dean of Education, Dr. Rachel Endo, and Director of Educational Leadership, Dr. Robin Minthorn, created this series with the intention for students in the School of Education to share personal journeys, expertise, and various topics relevant to education today. We thought this was really important because a lot of us expected to have a more traditional setting in a classroom and meeting each other in person, but due to the pandemic, we weren't able to do so. But luckily, we have this virtual platform that is allowing us to have the ability to connect and share our stories. So our goal is to make our voices be shared and to bring forth various topics of discussion. And the way that it will be running is that the speaker will have about 20 to 30 minutes of their presentation, which will be followed by a discussion with all of you joining us today. So I currently work at Muckleshoot Tribal College, which is located in Auburn, Washington. I have been here for almost 4 years now, and I work as the academic affairs instructor. So my work encompasses teaching, tutoring, hosting events such as advising days, curriculum, and program development. Working at the tribal college, it is a smaller institution, so the staff, we all wear a lot of hats. And before this, I was an elementary school teacher, including teaching special education. And just a side note, if you would like more information about Muckleshoot Indian Tribe, their website is muckleshoot.nsn.us, where you can get more information about their history, culture, their departments, education, etc. So as a student, I'm currently in the doctoral program UW-T in educational leadership with the Muckleshoot cohort, and we're specializing in Indigenous studies. So if you'd like, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box with your name and your affiliation with UW-T. And if you don't have an affiliation, you can just put in your name. So to start my educational journey, when thinking of personal education journeys, I think it's so important to go back to the beginning and to look at our roots. So I was born in a tiny island in the South Pacific in Suva, Fiji Islands. My family actually originates from Uttar Pradesh, which is located in India. But due to colonization, we ended up moving to the Fiji Islands, and that was about 4 generations ago. So the term that we describe ourselves is Indo-Fijian, and this is due to having a mix of Indian and island culture. So my family, we grew up in a rural farming community. My dad had a little corner grocery store, and we lived a simple life. So the picture on the far left is of myself and my siblings. I'm the baby. The next picture is of my parents and myself as a newborn. And the last picture is of my mom and my siblings, and we're celebrating Christmas. And I'm about 2 years old in this picture, which is the same age as my son right now. So a quick question: when you think of Fiji, what is the first word that pops into your head? So if you'd like, you can share your answer in the chat box. So I'll give you about a minute to answer. So if Rachel, if you don't mind, would you be willing to read some of the answers?
Absolutely. I see words like beautiful, tropical, island nation, warm and beautiful. Someone also just said island. So feel free to keep adding to the chat, but that's the tentative set of answers.
Thank you, Rachel. And all of that is true. Um, a lot of people think of Fiji as beautiful, tropical, beaches, etc. But it also actually has a history of political unrest. And over the years, we have gone through several military coups. And when this happens, our government shuts down, and schools, hospitals, the police, like anything that is public service, completely shuts down. And it's actually a really, really scary time. And so because of that, my family seeked asylum and were able to move to Canada. So I was about 5 years old when this happened. I started first grade right away. I never went to kindergarten because schools were shut down in Fiji. And anyone who's an immigrant to a new country knows that there are barriers that present themselves. In my family situation, we were starting all over. And it's not like we had even time to sell our store or anything like that back home. We basically just up and left the first chance that we were given. And so because of this, we were automatically low income, yet at the time, I didn't even realize we were low income until I was much older. So there's also the aspect of culture shock. So balancing two worlds, trying to fit in, but not quite fitting in, having parents working multiple jobs. So it was pretty tough, but my parents really showed me their hard work ethic. And of course, there are positives too. We had freedom of not having any military coups. I had amazing elementary school teachers who actually inspired me to become a teacher. They always made sure I felt welcome. And my family has always been supportive in anything I've ever wanted to do. And another reason was I always knew deep down that I always wanted to do something with my life that made a difference. So the picture on this slide is of our first snowfall in Canada. So I remember waking up at 10 p.m. to my siblings saying, "Hey, it's snowing outside." So we all went out in our PJs and played in the snow. And this picture is from the next day. So my educational journey. Has actually been a roller coaster. I was an average student in high school, so I didn't have straight A's at all. So when I started college, I wasn't mentally prepared. But in hindsight, I feel like the college also wasn't prepared for someone like myself, which I will talk about a little bit later. So I faced issues with equity, and it was also hard because I was working two jobs while attending college full time. So that made it kind of a hard balance. and also had a bad case of imposter syndrome and feeling like I didn't belong or that I wasn't intelligent enough to make it. I remember my guidance counselor, after I had told her that I wanted to eventually get my master's in psychology, and she said I should aim lower for something more attainable. So I remember that just making me feel bad about myself because I took comments from her and others to heart. And so, because of all of these things combined, I was just unsure of what academic path to take. So, long story short, I ended up on academic probation and I ended up quitting. So, following that, for a few years, I took time off. I traveled to other countries. I got to learn about other cultures and I experienced life. And with this, I got to know myself better. And I matured as well while gaining self-confidence. So when I went to college the second time around, I was older and more prepared, along with being more financially stable. But the main thing was I was really motivated to make it happen this time around. So I really took the time to get to know resources such as scholarships, tutoring centers, clubs that were available, etc. I just really wanted to take advantage of the opportunities that my parents didn't have growing up. And this was my driving force, and it still is my driving force. So I ended up graduating with a bachelor's in education and a master's in educational psychology. So what have I learned from my experiences? I have learned to fully embrace all the different facets of myself. So being an immigrant, first generation, student of color, being a woman, a mother, sister, auntie, friend, artist. And I have also learned to give back to the community. Currently, I mentor immigrant youth, most who are first generation, and I do this through a nonprofit. So as a student, I don't feel as afraid to take chances and to challenge myself. And even doing this presentation is a challenge for myself because it's not in my comfort zone. Um, and also no longer having imposter syndrome. And to be honest, that's for the most part, I still get it sometimes, but it's definitely not in a way to limit myself. And also knowing that many other students are experiencing the same things that I'm going through. So I'm a visual person. This is just a collage of my life to represent the many aspects of myself. So it's family members, myself as a teacher, my son and some of my artwork. And the presentation that I'm doing there is a presentation from about 10 years ago on Tulalip tribes and their history of boarding schools. So it was kind of foreshadowing of me ending up working for a tribe 10 years later. So you never know. So what have I learned as an educator? I've truly learned to be compassionate and to listen to my students and to always take time to understand their stories. The story that I shared about my guidance counselor earlier, I learned that I never want to underestimate any of my students ever, but to keep pushing them to pursue their dreams. Also, I've learned that it's okay to be vulnerable with my students and others to share my stories of hardships. It just makes you more relatable and human, and also the importance of educational equity and providing resources for all students. So many of you have probably seen this before, as it's popular in the educational world, but it's a powerful picture in demonstrating the difference between equality and equity. So an example would be if you give $1,000 to everyone. For a millionaire, it's probably not going to make a difference in their life, but to someone who may be living in poverty, it will make a huge difference. So for myself, educational equity is a huge interest to me in the field of education. As I stated earlier, having equity is so important in education because it allows students to have a fair chance regardless of race, gender, disabilities, etc. So I'm not going to go into the details of educational equity as we just don't have enough time. But from my own experience as an immigrant and first gen, these are some of my future goals. So one of them is having more transitional services available for immigrant and first generation students, such as specific advising for that demographic, having mentoring services from high school through college years, providing that social support, and having programs that students know are available and being able to utilize them.
My classmate.
And for Black, Indigenous, and women of color in education and other underrepresented groups, such as adults with disabilities, my goal is to conduct more research in those areas. And I just actually finished up a mini qualitative study on Indigenous women and their experiences in teaching in higher education. So on that note, we can open up our discussion. So these are just some starting points. You could choose another topic, of course. So feel free to write in chat box or speak on the screen. It's completely up to you. So I'll read some of the questions and then we can begin. So first question, what have you learned from your experiences or pathways in education? Whether it's first generation, immigrant, international student, or other identities, how has that influenced you as an educator? And what educational topics are you passionate about?
And also just to interrupt, also if you have questions for Amy as well about her experiences and her expertise, in addition to those amazing questions that she put forth.
I have a general question. What part of Canada did you grow up in?
Vancouver. Yeah, so not very far from here.
I had a question for you, Amy, and that was about, you mentioned your career as an elementary school teacher. And I know we've talked a lot about that experience. And I was just curious from your standpoint, what were some things you noticed in your teacher education program that you wish were different? And also, I know we have some TCP candidates or alumni here in the room. Thank you, great to see all of you. And maybe some advice that you would give to them as they navigate this world of teacher education, but also their career as classroom teachers.
That's a great question. So I did my teaching program at Central Washington University, but it was at Linwood Satellite Campus. And one of the biggest issues was having more diversity in curriculum. So for example, in our social studies, we barely had anything that was Native American, African American, or even students with disabilities. Like it just felt, it was very limited, or if we did have anything, it was just like quickly glazed over. And actually in the picture that I was talking about, the Tulalip tribes, is one of the lesson plans that I created. And they actually, from last time I heard, they still use it as part of their teacher prep program because they're trying to get more inclusive and diverse with their curriculum. And also in my cohort, there were 14 of us and only 2 that were people of color. So just even with teacher candidacy, just trying to get more diverse in how we recruit our teachers as well. And I know that one of the equity issues happens to be when we're student teaching. So usually student teaching can be 3 months or longer. And when you're student teaching, you don't get paid either. And so for a lot of students, this is difficult for them because they don't have an income coming in. So that becomes an equity issue as well. So Yeah, those are just all things to think about. And I know that UWT is very progressive, and that's why I love I love your institution, because I always feel like the faculty and the students are always forward thinking, and just from the differences that I've seen when it comes to curriculum has been a huge difference. So it's getting there, but we still have a ways to go for sure. And I was just curious again, how many students are in the teaching program?
We have about, right now, around 58.
Oh, wow.
So, and we're, our, you know, racial and cultural diversity has increased over time in the last 5 years. And we still have a lot more work to do. So
Mm-hmm.
we're about, we're trying to approach 40% teachers of color and white teachers. So we're kind of trying to even that out, considering that the state is 88% white teachers. And that also, you know, as you were educational psychology master's degree, and you know that school psychologists, counselors, principals, superintendents, all of which are 80 to 90% white, or 80 to 100% white. It's really, really challenging to start to move toward, I would say challenging and necessary to move toward a more diverse workforce that reflects the students that we're working with in the various communities that we're working in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I totally agree. Just having teachers reflect the demographic that we have, because currently, like you mentioned, that isn't the case. So yeah, just trying to figure out like how to recruit more students of color and diverse backgrounds to go into the teaching field for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, any help you can offer, we'll take it. I'm actually curious. I had my hand raised, so I'll just take this opportunity to ask you: has your sort of maybe working definition or view of equity changed over time in your different experiences?
Oh, definitely. Because originally the equity difference that I saw was just primarily from my viewpoint, the things that I went through. But for example, working with the tribe, I have a huge knowledge now of the equity issues that they face. So over time and the different populations that I've worked with, it's really expanded my viewpoint of all the different areas of equity that we need to improve upon in the field of education. And I know that we are improving, but like many have mentioned, we still have a long ways to go. And that includes adults with disabilities, because I worked with adults with disabilities as well. And when they enter higher ed, a lot of them face a lot of hurdles, and just trying to come up with programs that help support them as well. So yes, yeah, my definition of equity has definitely changed over time, and it'll continue to change.
Thank you.
This is refreshing hearing, Amy. Thanks for, when I talk to you, it's always refreshing because you remind me of equity, and it brings me back to my my degree at UWT on sustainability, and social justice was a big aspect of that. And it's strange because every time I'm removed from hearing these things, it seems that my mind becomes complacent. But then I'm reminded when I hear someone speak elegantly about these topics, or I hear the statistics, it baffles me that there's such an equality difference or equity difference that needs to be changed, and how rooted it is in the system that it seems unpenetratable. It seems difficult. It seems like it's a mire. It's hard to get in there and change things because of money, because of where the monies are coming from. It's coming from the top down. So I'm grateful whenever I hear you speak about these topics, and it reminds me and it humbles me a little, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And I love working with you because we always have great conversations. So I appreciate that. Yes. Oh, sorry, Robin.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask real quick, sorry, what lessons, and I know this is actually a loaded question too, but what lessons have you learned in working within a tribal community, coming in as a person that isn't from that tribal community? What type of lessons have you learned, and maybe that you think would be helpful for others who are not from Indigenous communities to know if they're hoping to work with or create partnerships or within tribes or Indigenous communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, how many lessons? So many. I think the most important thing I have learned is if you're unsure, that it's okay to ask. Like if I'm not sure of how something is handled, or if a ceremony is coming up and I don't know anything about it, I have learned that, well, in my experience, everyone here has been very welcoming, and they're able to freely share their traditions and their culture with me. So I'm so grateful that I am able to work in a place where it is openly shared. When it comes to, like teacher candidates, for example, if they want more information, I would highly suggest contacting a tribe, because like I said, they're more than open, from my personal experience, to share their information with you. And you can go to, for example, Muckleshoot's tribal school and speak with the teachers there, and they will openly share their curriculum with you. Because I know from my conversations with the other teachers here is that they want more people to know about their culture and their traditions and their history, the real history. And they're more than willing to provide it. So I would always recommend to just reach out. The worst that can happen is someone says no, and that's okay. But you'll find that most of the time people are willing to share their culture and traditions with you. And another thing that I've really appreciated is that it's I feel more so that I belong than a mainstream educational system. And the only reason I'm saying that is because it reflects more my style, which is more of a familial style. And that's kind of how Indigenous learning is. It's very familial and very, it's much more holistic, and everyone kind of knows each other. So it reflects my personality more. So yeah, I have learned so many lessons working here at the tribe, for sure. Thank you for that question.
Darren.
Hi, tied into that, I'd like to hear what you think some of the strengths are of the Northwest Indian College and the ways it impacts the community that you've noticed.
Okay, so I actually don't work for Northwest Indian College, but Kelly, who's on here, does work for Northwest Indian College. So they actually have a satellite campus here at Muckleshoot Tribal College, but and I will let Kelly speak about it too. But just to add to it, I feel like it's very reflective in, like all of the courses are reflective in Indigenous culture and often taught by Native faculty as well. So they already come from a place of understanding when teaching students here. So I feel like that's a huge strength. What else would you add to that, Kelly?
Well, Northwest Indian College was started up in the Lummi Nation because there's felt there was a need for a college that was more curtailed towards towards the Native community, because we've all learned about what were they? Can't even think of the words right now, but they took Native Native children and put them in boarding homes, boarding schools, and then this wasn't too long ago. I mean, this is so that there's a lot of very sensitive spots and difficulties for Natives to get into the regular schooling system in higher education. So it was built to help get higher education out to Native Americans. And it seems the classes are curtailed more into bringing cultural aspects into math, English, learning subjects. So some of them aren't as curtailed, like there's some biology classes that aren't, but for instance, there would be classes that have to deal with a lot of hands-on, going out and gathering plants, roots, weaving baskets, and so I think this kind of makes Native people feel more inclusive with the higher education, and not feeling excluded. And it there's so much you really have to kind of be absorbed into, like coming into a tribe and probably going to the school for a quarter or two to really, it's so vast and hard to explain, because it's hard to, things I didn't even notice, that there were so many different difficulties, hurdles that Native people of color have to go through, that you just take commonplace. You don't realize that. I just took things for granted. I didn't realize that these things have just been handed to me. I don't have psychological downfalls because I can't connect, or I have fears. I love that word you used, Amy. It was, what did you say? You said it a couple of times, where you don't feel like you're good enough, that you're a fake or something.
Oh, imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. That's amazing. And I think that really, I think a lot of Natives probably feel that way, like they're not good enough. They're not, they're fake, and they're just trying to get it. And I think this just gives enough seeds. I know it helped me. I'm only an 8th Tlingit, but it did get me coming here with my wife to Northwest Indian College. She said, "Hey, you should go, get enrolled in your tribe." I got enrolled. I'm just barely coming under the line, but it got me involved, and I learned a lot about my Native history. I'm really grateful about the tribe, and just to see how many hurdles there are, and I think this Northwest Indian College helped me get my associates, helped me get to UW-T. I felt it gave me the confidence of feeling I'm not a fake. And then UW-T was far enough, small enough classes that I felt comfortable enough to write papers, and the teachers were good enough at UW-T that they were like, they'd say, "Hey, we're not totally going to judge on your sentence structure completely. Just get those papers out, and have them well written. Make sure you give me your sources and stuff." They worked with you, and it made me be able to carry on. And wonderful program. UW-T is amazing. Really enjoyed my time there too. But definitely that Northwest Indian College, I think, is a wonderful thing to help Natives. So, and there's sites. There's each the tribes have off-site sites for Northwest Indian College. There's Tulalip, Nisqually, Muckleshoot, several other out there. So it's a great resource. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. And yeah, just to add on to that, because Northwest Indian College is a Native college, they have a huge understanding of the historical trauma that Indigenous people went through. So because of that, they're able to cater classes from an Indigenous point of view. And I think that helps a lot of our students feel comfortable, as Kelly was saying, to start off their college there and then maybe move on to UWC or another college or university. I'm just going to read the chat box here. So from Kawina, I apologize if I said your name incorrectly. It says, that speaks to my passion, more diversity and representation of school psychology, definitely. Totally agree with that. And Debbie Hales, who's a fellow cohort member in Muckleshoot cohort, a good resource are tribal language departments. Tribal colleges are a place where Indigenous peoples don't have to feel like they're walking in two worlds. Great point. One being a westernized, colonized education setting, the other their tribal world. At Northwest Indian College, Indigenous peoples don't have to explain being Indigenous. Oh, that's perfectly put, Debbie.
Amy, I was curious about in the time of COVID-19 and everything else that's going on, the ways that you as an educator and leader and your and the college, what are some things that you hope for the future, maybe some things that you're still struggling through, because we're all in this new abnormal together. So I was just curious about your insights and hopes for the future as we hopefully turn a good corner and can bid 2020 farewell forever.
Yeah, good question. I think the hardest part is not being able to see my students in person. Speaking with them online or over the phone doesn't quite feel the same. And because with our particular tribal college, it's very open door. So sometimes people just come in to chat. So it's kind of it's more of like a casual setting. So sometimes students come in, you know, just to grab a coffee and to say hi. And so I really miss that kind of thing too, you know, just having like quick conversations here and there and just having that connection in person. Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of COVID, we weren't really prepared at all. And because I know that the reservation has issues with internet connection as well. And so not being able to provide our students, you know, like a computer lab and to be able to access internet without it getting disrupted or having a weak connection, just even that little thing was like a huge hurdle for us. And so we were doing things like allowing students to come to the parking lots to use the Wi-Fi and things like that, and just trying to be as creative as possible in order to make sure students were still able to attend classes online, and distributing laptops if they're available. Just all of those things made a huge difference for sure. But like you said, goodbye 2020. And hopefully we can go back to normal very soon, sooner rather than later. But I would say that was the hardest part, was making sure that all of our students have internet connection and that they were able to attend their classes.
Can you remind us what the discussion questions were?
Oh, yes. What have you learned from your experiences or pathways in education? Second question, whether it's first generation immigrants, international students, or other identities, how has that influenced you as an educator? And what educational topics are you passionate about? So that last question, I'm really curious, everyone's educational topic that you're passionate about. Or an area of interest.
Well, I'll start. One of the things that I am passionate about is equity studies in math education. So how students experience mathematics, learning of mathematics, both inside and outside the classroom, and what gets respected and what is not, and who gets a chance to advance and engage in interesting mathematics and who doesn't. And one of the things that and this is something that I've been a part of for most of my adult life. One of the things though that you had mentioned that I think I have trouble with, and I know I have tension with, I guess I'd just say, is this idea of people of color having this idea of imposter syndrome. I think when I even say it, my stomach hurts, right? So I have a very visceral emotional reaction to it because it's something that I feel is a way to disempower people of color. And it's not to like say people don't have those feelings, but it is to then describe yourself as that. It feels sometimes as a way of internalizing the racism and the structural racism that actually makes you feel those feelings. And so those are the things that I struggle with because I want to promote more of a resilience perspective, of a we can't be broken perspective, right? Or one that, to the point where people should feel like there should be no question that everyone belongs, that people belong, that if you decide that you want to like go into a math education career or something that requires STEM, let's say, you have every right to feel that that is a place for you. And those are the things that I struggle with around, because I've heard that a lot, and all the equity work that I do with young people and have been a part of programs similar to what you've described. They're sort of the way of creating spaces or counter spaces to that argument. And so those are the things that I was thinking about in terms of the role equity has played in my life, in terms of the scholarship, things that I am passionate about with the work that I do with teachers, but also the troubling of this idea of imposter syndrome and replacing that in some kind of way with a more resilient or centered view that we belong. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I love the this, turning around that feeling of imposter syndrome into something much more powerful and empowering instead. Yeah, that's a tough one, especially when it comes to math education. Because I've read the statistics over the years, especially when it comes to girls in math and versus boys in math. Often in the States, around age 14, a lot of girls happen to either fall back in math or have no interest in math any longer. And you look at some other countries, and girls are either on par with boys of that age, or they're even further ahead. So that's really interesting in math. And I would love to learn more about that as well. Yeah.
I think one of my areas that there's, obviously around Indigenous leadership. I'm passionate around that. So I want to, at some point, my hope was this last summer to be doing some research with my own tribal community in Oklahoma around intergenerational concepts of leadership. And so I wasn't able to do that because of COVID. So I'm hoping to be able to do that, if not next summer, this following summer. So the timeline's been extended because I think I might have shared this with the students before, but whenever I wanted, my first dissertation topic was wanting to understand concepts of leadership with my own tribe. When my first advisor told me that I would have researcher bias and wasn't allowed to do that. And so because I'm from the tribe and I wanted to work with my own tribal community, which was obviously very a misinformed perception, but being a doctoral student, I didn't know that I could push against that. But I did know that I didn't want him to be my academic advisor anymore. So I immediately switched to somebody else. And so I chose to do a more broadened concepts around Indigenous leadership in regards to college students. And so I want to go back to what I initially wanted to do in my dissertation and work with my own tribal community, not only my own tribal community, but also my descendant communities. So I'm also Umatilla and also Nez Perce as well, from the Northwest area. And so wanting to also make connections there and do that as well. And so I think that's something that I also am interested in doing, as well as the impact of Indigenous doctoral programs like NALI, which I was a part of helping to create at UNM, and then this Muckleshoot cohort. And then also I'm a co-founder of a Native American sorority that's going to be 20 years old this next year. And so I'm also wanting to do an impact study on a Native American sorority and retention and persistence of Native women in higher education. And so wanting to also look into that. So I'm all around like Natives in higher ed and want to support all Native students and communities. And so that's my passion, because that's also part of who I am.
Yeah, that's awesome, Robin. Yeah, your passion comes through in all of the work that I've seen you do. That's unfortunate about your advisor. Just as I talked about my guidance counselor earlier, words have such an impact, and the fact that they felt that that you were going to be biased is very unfortunate. And I'm glad that you took the initiative and got another academic advisor as well. But yes, I see your passion in all of your work.
Amy, I also wanted to point out that Liz, by the way, Liz is our new part of the School of Ed team. She's our new academic advisor and recruitment and retention specialist. But I just wanted to point you that Liz had something in the chat that I think, if you'd like to respond to, it's amazing about her passion. Can you see the chat, or would you like me to read it out loud?
I can read it.
Okay, sure.
I'm extremely passionate about social justice, equity, and the intersection of poverty. I have worked with first-generation, low-income, immigrant, refugee, undocumented students of color, students who have experienced homelessness, and those who have experienced the foster care system. I have seen many inequities, as well as heard so much harmful language, and have seen so many policies and procedures that create so many more obstacles for students. Wow, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, some policies and procedures definitely end up creating more obstacles for students. Just to add a question to that, what would be an example of like the biggest obstacle that you saw that hindered students, Elizabeth?
I would say there's quite a few, but I'll just give you an example of working with those who experienced homelessness. So when I worked with folks who are experiencing homelessness, just the sheer fact that just even the policies of doing everything online. So for those who are experiencing homelessness, I feel like a lot of people don't understand that they don't have that same access as others do to online procedures. And so like just the sheer amount of work it took for them to even get to the campus, because everything, including your application, is online, was very, very difficult. Transportation was difficult. Them feeling it was okay for them to be in class was difficult. They had instructors that were that I had to talk to on several occasions about being late, with them not understanding that it's a totally different, when you're, you know, waking up, there's no alarm clock, you're sleeping in your car, you know, there's so much to it, and it takes them so much courage to even get there on campus and feel that they have the, you know, ability to be there and study. And so, I mean, that's just one example, but there's so many more that I have seen. I've worked in admissions and outreach. I've done advising for students. I've worked in the diversity offices. Even sometimes in the diversity offices have been harmful, and I've heard harmful things being said. And so I just know that that's my passion, because I feel like everybody has the right to have an education. I feel like everybody has that ability. Each one of us has different gifts and skills that we need to give to the world. And I think it's really important for us to validate every student, because it takes courage to even walk through the doors.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. I completely agree. I know here at the Tribal College, that was actually one of our issues during COVID as well, are for those students who don't have, you know, access to these resources that often people assume everyone has access to. And the fact that these students are trying so hard to get their education, and they have all these things that they have to go through. For example, like even a student who takes public transportation, you know, if their bus is late, then they're late for class, and then they get penalized for being late for class. So it's just kind of all those things that add up. And so how do we as educators and those who work in education help students who are experiencing homelessness or other issues, and how we can create more programs to help them with that?
I just wanted to point out Dr. Minthorn's insights in the chat about even the word homeless and perhaps unsheltered. So thank you. I think that the little language tweaks are really helpful. I am also just doing a quick time check, and I'm just so appreciative too of this, for everyone for your questions and this amazing dialogue, and especially for Amy for your ideas and for your willingness to share and to launch this for us. And I would also just say, before I give it to Dr. Minthorn to close us off, this is our first time doing a colloquium series. So if you know of others who might be interested, just have them contact me. We are, again, piloting things, and in the COVID environment, the time for connection and community is more important. So again, thank you, Amy, for your, just for sharing. You're amazing. And I just, every day, every time I meet you, I feel more honored, and I just learned so much from you. And so I will hand it off to Dr. Minthorn to close us out.
Do you want to say something, Amy?
I just want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today, and especially to Dr. Endo and Dr. Minthorn for you know, creating this safe space where all of us can discuss important topics. So I'm excited for this program, and I'm excited to see future speakers of this program as well.
Yay, yes. Thank you so much for everybody for being here, for your time, and just wishing you all hopefully rest in the next few weeks if we're able to catch up and catch our breath. But also appreciate Amy sharing your lived experience and your story. I know you you inspire many people by your interactions, and just like, you know, this one small piece of action can create ripple effects, and just want to acknowledge that, and that you are part of those ripple effects, and just want to acknowledge that your work is impactful. And so just appreciate everybody being here, and hope everybody has a safe day, and that you remain healthy and strong and safe. So many ahos.